All right, we'll go ahead and get started here. Hopefully you all can hear me. Thanks for joining us for our final webinar. It is finally well, I shouldn't say finally, it is the end of April now. So this is our last webinar of the month in our April series. We'll have a couple more. We're gonna be scheduling some more for May, and all of you will be, I believe everyone should be on our email list. If you're not, go ahead and shoot me an email, but we'll send out an email and announce all of our upcoming May webinars here this weekend. So stay tuned for those. In the meantime, if you do have a technical difficulty with this webinar, please just go back, refer back to the initial email that was sent out when you signed up for the event. Click on the link and reopen the app, and everything should work properly again. Anyways, today we have Blake Griffin back with us here today from Capture One. We had a very informative, he brought a very informative introduction to Capture 120 back at the beginning of the month, and so we thought we'd bring him back for the end of the month to give us a simple overview of Capture 120 workflow. So without too much further ado, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Blake. I will note that if you have any questions, go ahead and just put those in the chat or put them in the Q&A section of Zoom here. We will try to get to those at the end of the session if they aren't already answered by the end of the presentation. So just drop them there. And over to you, Blake.
All right, perfect. Thanks again for having me. Glad to be here today. We're going to go over relatively quickly a basic workflow through Capture One today. The reason I call it relatively quickly and also as well as a basic workflow is that traditionally what I'm going over now would be part of about a 4-hour session, which we're going to try to hopefully get down to about an hour today. So we'll go over some things and we'll kind of start from there. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start by sharing my screen here for Capture One. I have popped up and you can see here what is our recent catalogs window, or recent open window. This, if you are a Capture One user and you have already created either a catalog or a session, when you open the software, this will be the first prompt that you see, and it will allow you to open very quickly to a particular session that you had before. So before I get too started into this, today we're going to be using a session-based workflow during this process. Capture One allows you to work in either what's called a catalog or a session, and there's a lot of benefits to doing one or over the other. And there's actually an entire hour-long webinar that we've got on our website that walks you through all the specifics of which one is going to work best for you. Today, for ease of use, we're going to actually go with the session-based workflow and work from there. So to start, what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to select New Session. When a new session window comes up, let's see here, it should be... Let's try that. There, perhaps. Okay. So when a new session window comes up, it looks like this here. A new session window asks you for a name for your session, which you have the ability to name whatever you would like. In my personal workflow, I like to do, for example, the person that I'm going to be taking photographs of that day and then a date. So for today, we'll do Camera West, and we will do 04/30/2020, something like that. The next session, or the next box here, is location, or where would you like to have your files shared to. You have the ability to select any file where you would like it to be. I personally have it set up in what's my shoot to file, which we can talk about as well if you would like. The long and short of it is doing it this way makes it a little bit easier in the unlikely event that something goes wrong with your computer. You can still have access to any files that are currently on your system. Templates here, you've got a way to set up templates. I typically don't use those. And then it's going to give you several options for how do you want to name different files within your session. I generally like to keep these as they are, with the only exception that I've learned recently is to rename the trash subfolder something else. In this case, I will name it trashy, which makes it a lot easier to determine if you move a file to the trash, whether or not it's in the session trash or your system trash, and depends from there. So what you can go ahead and do there is then hit OK to open and create the new session window. I did this a little bit earlier today as sort of a preview. So let me see if I can get to this portion here. Inside of this session, which is what I've got the file open now, there are these 5 files. These files coordinate and go with the session files that we had earlier. A database file, capture, output, selects, and trash. Capture is going to be any files that are imported or shot tethered. Output is going to be any files that are outputted. Selects are a special file that you can move files to kind of get them away from the main capture. And then trash is pretty self-explanatory. It's the trash. So I've already got that session created, so I'm going to go ahead and open that session here. Now that the session is open, you will see that there are no images selected, no collections. This is a blank and empty workspace here. And this is pretty close to what you would see with Capture One as you open it up for the first time here. One thing I'm going to do for today's webinar is I'm going to go to Window, Workspace, and I'm going to add and move to the simplified import, edit, export workspace. You will see that mainly what that does is it changes some of my tools, and then up here in the corner, right upper left-hand corner, it changed and limited some of the options that we've got available here. For the simplified workflow, it's going to make it a little bit easier for us to discuss today. So the first thing I'm going to do as we kind of go along is I am going to walk you through some of the tools that you see through Capture One. Starting in the upper left, we have our import and export tools. That, of course, allows you to bring in images and then export them when you are finished. We have a reset tool, which allows you to reset all adjustments on an image, undo, redo. So if you did want to make a change and it just wasn't quite right, you can do that as well. We have an auto adjust option, which, you know, personally, I'm not a big fan of. I don't recommend, but it is there in case that you do choose to go that way. We have our cursor tools in the middle, and like I showed during our first webinar, and I will show it again, you can control click and say customize toolbar, and that opens up a window that has all of the various tools that you can put in that place if you so like. And we'll be using some of these today as we go along. Edit selected. This box should be on by default, and I tend to like it to stay on. If you do turn it off, one piece that kind of is a little bit annoying is that if you go to export multiple images, it will only do the one image selected instead of all if it is not in orange. We have an exposure warning to show if any images or any part of the image is blown out while you're shooting it. We've got a grid, and then copy and apply. So we'll use those tools as we go along. I'm going to start on my library pane here. That's going to be the first piece. Capture One likes it when you work from left to right by default, so we'll start with the library. This library starts with an option of showing what session that we are currently in. This one is the one that we just set up for today, and you have the ability to access all of the other pieces that you would have had on boot. And if you wanted to switch quickly between sessions, you've got the ability to do so. You also can create a new session by clicking on this plus and creating a new session or a new catalog during the process. Again, it's showing the session folders that we created at the beginning, as well as some smart albums that are created that allow us to sort of quickly look at images and some other pieces. So I'm going to start by going to import. And this is the typical menu that you would see as you are importing from an SD card. In this case, I've got a file that I have chosen that where my files are going to be coming to. I've picked a couple today that we're going to be working with. If you don't see files here, I would definitely include subfolders. And then in some cases, if you do shoot multiple times on the same card without refreshing it, without wiping it each time, you may want to select the exclude duplicates option as well. That may help a little bit when finding the images that you're looking for. The next piece is, where do you want those files to go when they are inside of Capture One? In this case, we want to put those into the capture folder that we created during this capture session. That way we can find them there. The backup to option allows you to move these files to a secondary point if you would so wish during the import process. I tend to not do that, but of course your workflow may vary. We have a naming tab where you've got all sorts of various tokens that you can choose and tell Capture One how you would like to name the image. In our workflow today, I'm just going to leave it as image name. You've got the ability to add metadata that was not captured by your camera during this time as well. This adjustments tab is actually really cool. If you shoot particularly with, for example, a set of styles that you like, you can have Capture One automatically apply those styles on import. But also what you can do is, if you know, for example, that you tend to shoot either underexposed or overexposed purposely, and then adjust your shadows or highlights accordingly there, you can actually tell Capture One that you would like to have that happen automatically when an image comes in. That way it saves you some time. The other piece that you'll see here is the file info. This is going to give you some basic information about the name of the file, the date it was captured, what type of camera it was captured on, basic metadata information. So coming into our images today, I'm going to import these 5 images. And I want to draw your attention down here to the bottom tab before I hit import 5 images. The first is eject card. You can tick that box to, of course, eject any physical media that you have that you're drawing photos from at the time of importing. And also pay very close attention to the erase images after copying. I highly, highly, highly suggest that you do not tick that box unless you like to live on the edge. 2 is 1, 1 is none. Always have that backup copy of images available. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to import these 5 images today. And as they are importing, Capture One is generating previews for these 5 images. Depending on how fast your computer is currently running, that may take a little bit of time, but you will now see that the 5 that we selected are now on the left of my screen. Moving forward, we're going to look at some of the filter options from the library tab. Of course, each image allows you to, by selecting 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, you can star these images as needed. Or if you control click on a Mac, you have the ability for rating and color tag. You can tag images colors that you would like, depending on your workflow. I know some people like to tag an image green when it's done and ready for export. All of these tags are loaded within the system here, and you've got the ability to filter an image by tag. So in this case, I've got 1 file that is 4 stars, and I currently have 1 file with a green tag. You can use those for sorting and putting things together. And then finally as well, you've got some dating options, some more metadata options, and we can show you how to edit some of those a little bit later as well. All parts of the process of finding and locating your files. So my next piece I've got here, this is going to be sort of a general workspace but for changing and correcting your images. Of course, going from top to bottom, you've got your white balance, and you have the ability to apply various types of white balance. You can use the color picker to select your white balance as well, or you can also manually adjust your color temperature and tint to find the white balance that fits you the best. In the exposure tool, you've got the ability to, of course, correct exposure or adjust it as you see fit, contrast, and then brightness and saturation. Brightness is kind of like exposure, except the difference is that you're only affecting the midtones of the image, not the highlights or the shadows. And then saturation, of course, is how saturated of a color that you would like to have. The high dynamic range tool allows you to do a little bit more fine tuning when it comes to the various parts of your images, correct for blown highlights, move things to the shadows. In this image here, I'm going to go to the hand and I'm going to zoom in. Looks to me that we've got a little bit of hotness here on just the tip of her nose. So I'm going to bring back those highlights and see. You know, actually, now that I'm adjusting it, I really don't, it doesn't bother me all that much. We can do the same with shadows. I can change that background and change everything there. I also can adjust specific white and black points within the image to sort of dial that in to where I would like it to be. Clarity is another one of those topics that can have an hour-long discussion of its own, but the easiest way to sort of describe clarity is its various ways to add sharpness to the midtones of an image. Each of these four options, natural, punch, neutral, and classic, all handle how that sharpening is done a little bit differently. And so I would encourage you to go through and play to see how you would like that to look as we go on. I don't tend to do any clarity at this point, but I may come back a little bit later to make that happen. We have our levels tools. So levels being red, blue, green across the color spectrum. You've got the ability to edit those as a whole or individually as well. In this case, of course, like I said, I'm not going to be using that quite yet because I think that the colors that I've got here are pretty happy with where I would like them to be, but we can always come back to that as well. Here is your curve. Of course, this allows you to look at both RGB as well as the individual colors to make adjustments in the contrast and how each individual color responds. I will also bring you to the Luma curve option. The Lumosity curve is a really awesome tool that we have that allows you to adjust your image, much like the rest of the curves, but it only affects the exposure of the image, not the colors. So by making the curves and the adjustments in the Lumosity curve, I'm not affecting the individual red, green, or blue channels and messing them up in any way. We have our color editor tool next. The color editor tool is just what it sounds. It allows you to edit the colors of your images. We have introduced into Capture 120 a new version of our basic color editor that allows you very easily to select certain channels and make changes to them. So, you know, I don't want to say that I want to do anything to the David Bowie red on this shirt, but I've got the ability to make that change if I do so choose, but we're not going to do things here. One thing that I do love about Capture One is how colors are handled, and Capture One and color go hand in hand. I'm going to look at this skin tone tool here. We're going to show you kind of how that works. Now, I don't want to do too many adjustments here, as my model was also my makeup artist in this case, and she does a wonderful job at what she does. But I can see here that in this case, we've got a little bit more red in her skin than I generally would like to have for this part. So I'm going to go ahead and do my color dropper, and I'm going to select just that portion. To make things easier for us today, I'm going to do the View Selected Color Range, which what that is going to do is it will desaturate the colors that are not being affected. So in this case, you'll see the background is a little bit more gray, and we lose a lot of the reds in her shirt. By this tool, we have the ability to further dial in and just see which colors that we would like to affect. So in probably the easiest way, I can dial this back. We'll stop working with the shirt. Unfortunately, I don't know if I can get it any real cleaner so that we're not affecting her hair in this case. I might be able to, yeah, I think that's gonna probably be about as close as we're gonna get here. So once I do that, I can look at the remaining colors and I can adjust the color saturation, and I can adjust the hue of that color and the lightness to kind of find where I would like it to be. And then I can decide how uniform that color and saturation, how we want to bring that color overall. And in this case, I think that I went a little bit overboard, so I'm going to go back and reset that tool. This actually brings up a good time that allows you to kind of look at each of the individual tools that we have here. Each one has its own help icon that gives you some overviews of how that tool works. We have a copy and adjustments clipboard. We'll get to that here momentarily. We have reset. And then you have some presets and some options as to how you want to select some colors in a contextual menu. Moving on to the color balance tool. If you ever do any work with video editing, this may look familiar to you by default as it comes up with the three-way color balance. But this allows you to make adjustments based on the shadows of the image, the midtones of the image, and highlights of the image in terms of introducing color or making color corrections as you would like across the way. If the three-way tool is a little bit too intimidating for you, we do have the ability just to work on shadows, midtones, and highlights as well during this process. So then moving on, we've got vignetting. This allows you to, of course, add or subtract vignetting to an image, depending on whether or not you would like to do it artistically or if you're making corrections for your lenses. We've got an overall sharpening that allows you to sharpen the image. I tend to leave this out during this phase of the process as well, because I like to sharpen a little bit later on. And then finally, in the basic area, we have our lens correction tool. In this case, I was shooting on the Sony 55 1.8, and my camera took that information and brought it in. So Capture One has found it. We've got the ability to apply various lens corrections based on that model. And as you can see here, we've got a lot of different lenses covered and having those sort of built into our system. This process allows us to correct for chromatic aberration if it does appear. You can correct for diffraction, turning it on or off. And then you have the ability of, in terms of wider angle lenses, hiding distortion if you do so choose. And then you've got the ability to kind of manually put those into play here as well. So that's the basic adjustments that we get from the basic panel to starting with an image here. Before I move on to the next pane, are there any questions that have popped up so far that I can answer to make things easy? Looks like I've got one question. How do I delete photos inputs from Capture One? Can I get a little bit more information on this, Stephen, for what you're asking there? And Clark, my screen does not have all the options that you have. One thing I would check here, Clark, as we're going through everything, is make sure that we are in the correct window. There are various workspaces that Capture One has by default. Today, we're working in just the simplified import, edit, export window, which changes things around a little bit. Probably by default, your window may look more like this, more like the default. Default gives you some more options. We're simplifying that a little bit today to make things easier. Okay, Clark, I'm in the simple import export and don't have as many options. Interesting. I wonder, without seeing your screen, I can't really give you a good option there. Okay, we only have white balance, color editor, color balance, sharpness, and lens correction. I may have to look into that one. What I can do and what I can show you as well is that since all of these are customizable, you do have the ability to go to Window, Create Floating Tool, and you can select a different tool if you would like to, something that you may not have here. In this case, we'll go ahead and I'll select black and white. Now the floating tool, once it's available, you can actually drag it into place and put it where you would like to in the Capture One window here. So that may work as well, Clark, to get you taken care of there. All right, so what we'll do now is I'll continue on. This is my styles and presets window. By default, there are a couple of built-in styles that come with each version of Capture One, and you do have the option, if you do so choose, to purchase more or create your own styles to utilize in your images. In this case today, I am going to go with let's go black and white. Let's see what we can create in this case. You can see as I highlight over each of the various black and white styles that a preview shows upon the image that we're working with here. And all of these are happening in real time, and they're not having to render each time, which makes it really easy to kind of determine what look you think works best for your image. I am going to go with, let's try black and white 3 today. And once I've got that, I've got it applied here on the tool. Now, another piece that you can do during the retouching process, it's not in our simplified workspace today, but if we open up and if we add, I'm going to add our layers tool so that we can look at that today. The layers tool allows you to make and do changes only on specific layers to the image. So for example, if you wanted to colorize a background, you can actually adjust and make things happen there. But the reason I'm bringing this up in this case is the same way that we can apply a style and a preset to an image overall. I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to reset this here today. And I'm going to come down to black and white 03 again. And I'm going to say, let's see here. I think I need to be in another window to make that happen. Let me try this here. Go back. And I should be able to, all right. Very interesting. I'll have to go back and look at that. Normally you have the ability to apply this style onto a layer of the image so that you could dial it back or dial it forward if you would like to. I think it might be because I'm doing a black and white image and it was originally captured in color. I think that may be part of some of the issues that we have here. So now that I have chosen this image to be black and white, I've got the black and white tool that we added just a moment ago, and this allows me to make the edits as I see fit, sort of across and apply. You could think of this as applying various filters like you would in a dark room in this case. Aha, okay, so sorry, I just saw Stephen's question here. Stephen, we'll cover that here in just a little bit. I think we can do that aside to make things happen here. All right, so we've applied our style to this image. We've got this image looking about the way that I would like it to be for this case. Now, there's a couple of different ways that you can continue. Of course, you have the ability to edit and change each image as you see fit, but there is another easier way. If you want all of your images to look uniform and apply the same uniform changes, you can attach and hit the copy button in the upper right-hand corner, and then you can either select multiple images and then hit apply, and it will apply that same look across images. Or we can undo that here. Up in our toolbar, we have an apply arrow tool, which would allow you to select individual images that you would like to apply any changes to. And that as well gives you a pretty good way to move forward there. This window, of course, is also, I should have mentioned earlier, this is where you can work through and cull any images. So for example, if you think that an image doesn't work for what you're looking for, you can hit the delete button and move those to the system trash, which puts everything together here. So I'm going to reset that. And actually, I'm going to undo, and that should bring back my images. Yes, there they are. So I'm going to go ahead and just for the sake of everything, I'm going to copy and apply. The cool thing about Capture One as well is you can actually individually copy certain pieces of each tool and not have to apply an overall. So if, for example, on this image here, I wanted to really up the contrast, if this was what I wanted, I can take and go to my copy adjustments menu here, copy them, and then apply that way as well. Okay. So now it's time. We've got our images worked for the way that we would like. I'm going to go ahead and we're going to move to the export window here. Now, this process recipes area may look a little bit different on my screen than it does on yours, particularly, of course, because I especially have an untitled recipe here. I'm going to go ahead and remove that, and we'll show you how to add everything back. These recipes are sort of how Capture One is going to be outputting the file. And by default, we have a couple ones that are built in. We have a web use, full size, a TIFF, and then various JPEG options as well. Couple of cool things to point out is the quick proof, for example, which should be there, is designed to do a couple of things. It outputs the image based on the preview file that Capture One generates as you're working on the image. So it allows you to export, for example, in a catalog mode, you can export images without having your hard drive attached. Otherwise, if you are using catalogs, you would not be able to export images without being attached to your media. The other neat thing is that by default, this quick proof preview size here is actually sized for Instagram. So you've got a really easy way to quickly output files for social media use, for clients, things of that sort. So inside of a process recipe, we have a couple of different pieces of information. The basic is showing some information here, what format the image is going to be, what quality you would like it at, et cetera, et cetera. And just to have some fun today, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to create a new recipe. When you hit the plus sign here, the untitled recipe comes up, and you can change that and edit it and name it whatever you would like. So for my untitled recipe, I want this to be sent out as a JPEG. We'll take the quality and I'll bring it down 50% roughly. I'm going to keep my ICC profile as Adobe RGB. Since we're doing this, I'm going to set it at 72, so we're going to have a good web size file here. And then I will do this and I'll say, do that at a 75% scale. I'm working with my A7R4 files here, so I don't really need a full 60 plus megapixel file during my output. You have the ability to select an output location. By default, the output is the output folder that you selected when you set up your session. And you have the ability to select desktop or any other folder as well. Capture One can also do subfolders, which is really cool. So you have the ability to export multiple copies of the image at the same time and sort of direct them where you would like them to go. I generally will export a full-size JPEG once I am finished and a web size use and keep them both and archive them that way. You have an output naming. So if you wanted to change the name of your image as it goes out from what you named it coming in, again, you've got the abilities to do so and add all sorts of tokens during this process. And then finally, a process summary, which tells you which recipe you're using, which file it's applied to, and gives you some pertinent information about the item here. Now, one piece that comes up and I get a lot of questions about is if you're in the export process, you can see I've got my untitled recipe checked here. But let's say that as I was looking at that, I was also considering exporting this as a TIFF. When I go to process my image by hitting process here in the process recipes, I'm going to get this little pop-up window that says the selected recipe will not be used for processing because it is not enabled. Capture One is not allowing you to process the TIFF, which is what is currently highlighted, because it's showing that the untitled one is the one that's in use. So if you want to make sure that something is processed, make sure that not only are you highlighted over it, but go ahead and tick that box as well. And we'll go ahead and we'll process these files out. In this case, I've only got the one file highlighted, so it's being processed now. And then by default, I believe I've got it still up here in the Finder. Give me just a moment here. And in this file output window, that's where these two files that we've just outputted have shown up. And from here, you've got the ability to send this off to your printer, upload to the web, and do everything that you would like to with these files. And of course, these are the output files. All of the original captures that we have are still in this capture file. And then if we had moved anything into the trash file would have pieces as well. So that in short is kind of a basic, very basic walkthrough of images from importing to exporting. Let's go back to some questions and see what we can do here. So back to Stephen. How would I delete images that are imported? So probably the easiest way is to go back to the library tab. And yours may look a little bit different if you started out in a catalog workflow. You've got the ability to navigate through the system files here, or I believe there's actually an additional piece in this library tab that's not showing since I'm on a session workflow, and you can remove the images from there. Ben Roberts, how would you work with a program or a plugin like Silver Effects Pro 2? Very good question. So there are a couple of different ways that you can do that. I tend to prefer going to image at the top of the screen. Let me make sure that we're sharing Capture One here again. Image. And then you have the option of edit with or open with. Edit with, for example, let's just say I wanted to do some retouching on this image. Edit with will pop up this window here asking what type of file do you want to send into that plugin. In my case, going for Affinity Photo here, I want to export this as a 16-bit TIFF, so it's going to be the largest possible file that I can work with, uncompressed, the right resolution. I can choose to apply any adjustments in terms of sharpening, and I can also add some metadata information. When I do that and hit Edit Variants, Capture One is going to export a new image at the sizes and the resolution that we choose. You can see that it's doing that on the screen now. And then once that is done, it should automatically open up. And of course, since I'm only showing Capture One, you're not seeing this here. But my copy of Affinity Photo is opening up now as well to allow me to provide edits. You can do the same with other plugins, such as the Nix plugins as well. The reason I recommend going with the image edit with instead of open with is that edit with creates a new file here on the right-hand side of the screen. You can see that this is my raw, and here is my TIFF of the same name. When you save that TIFF file, any changes that you make for it or make to it will show up here as well. So you've got an easy way to bounce back and forth and see the final file versus the raw file that was captured. Let's see here. Back to Clark. I only have process recipes shown. All these other tools I'm having to add one by one. That is quite strange, Clark. I would probably want to touch bases with you personally and see what we can do on that one here. My stupid question that I want to ask is to make sure that, of course, the tools themselves are not just hidden with the little arrows here. So for example, output naming, process summary. These may be closed up. I would check that as well as a piece to look at there. Looks like we've still got probably about 15 minutes left. Any questions else that I can answer for anybody here?
I think that is about it. I'm not seeing any more come in. I did want to remind everyone that if you don't currently have a Capture One 20 Pro license for the rest of the month, which is today and tomorrow, I believe, we still have our promotional discount of 40% off a Pro license. You can get that through directly by emailing me, ben@camerawest.com, or just going to our website and searching for Capture 120 and then using the code that I'll leave in the chat here. So I did want to remind people that it looks like we did just get, let's see. Clark has another question about sessions versus catalogs.
Let's see here. When to use a catalog versus a session. So I will defer back to the beginning of our process here. I'm going to see while we're doing that if I can pull up and send over the exact webinar that I'm referencing. Sessions versus catalogs are an entire process that could be an hour-long chat on its own. In short, a catalog-based workflow is designed more for long-term projects where you're going to need to apply metadata, apply various tags to an image. Say, for example, you were photographing doors across the world. You could actually then say, okay, this door was in Istanbul. I took it in the fall. And then when it came time to pull up images later, you could say, oh, I want to see all of the pictures that I took during the fall. I want to see all the pictures I took in Seattle and be able to use those tags that way. Versus a session is more of you could kind of think of it as a one-time use way to look at images. I prefer sessions because of how images are selected and how they are put into place. I know that all of my captured images are going to be in one place. All of my output images for that session are going to be in one place. And really it comes down to personal choice for the workflow. So yes, I highly suggest looking at the webinar here that I am pulling up for the moment. While I'm doing that, what other questions do we have?
Look like Stephen has a question. Yes, Stephen, we will have this recording posted later today on our blog, so you can rewatch it there. And you can always reach out to us at Camera West. All of us are Capture One users, in fact. We've all converted in about the past year. So you can reach out to us if you have any technical questions. And if you have anything that's more in depth than that, Capture One actually has a fantastic support spot on their website that you can get a lot of those questions answered.
And that's actually that's a nice segue here that I can bring up here. When you launch Capture One, if you have for the first time, you may have noticed this fancy pop-up window that comes up here. This pops up every time unless you tell it not to. And up here at the top, you see tutorials, webinars, and support. Tutorials are little small 2 to 10-minute videos that specifically talk about one topic through across the Capture One workflow. Our webinars are generally hour or longer webinars that are taught with sort of our main instructor, David Grover, and various guests as well. These longer webinars get into in-depth detail about various different pieces. And then support. The support is really awesome because it gives you the ability to submit support tickets to our support team, but also we have over 10,000 frequently asked questions that we've profiled across the piece as well. So more than likely, if you've got a question, there's a good likelihood that we probably have answered for you and have those put together. The last thing that I am going to post in the chat today is earlier this month, we actually started what we called our 30-day challenge. And the 30-day challenge is a bite-sized learning piece that we created that allows you to, as the name suggests, within 30 days, go from absolutely never having touched Capture One before to becoming pretty proficient and being able to work through the process. So let me find that, and I will post that into the chat as well. While we're doing that, let me know if there are any other questions that kind of come through.
Good.
There we go. And then we'll go back to the chat. And there's the link to the 30-day challenge that should now be popping up as well.
Like Clark has a question about Lightroom catalog and the folders. If I'm understanding that correctly, the folders in importing subfolders in the Capture One catalog, and how does Capture One import or handle those subfolders?
Good question, Clark. That's going to be another one that I would highly suggest let's go to the web with. There's actually, if you go to capture1.com now, underneath the Learning Hub tab, there is a switching from Lightroom category there that may help answer sort of how that works. Basically, in short, you have to export your catalog from Lightroom and then import it into Capture One, and a bit of magic happens at that time to put it all together. If you have photos grouped by year, perhaps I would take and create the catalog in such a way where you have it separated by years during the import as well. But again, that's going to come down to particularly your workflow there.